Let's kick it off with a super good start with a journey of where you've come from. So tell me about why you got into fashion, your starting point, so the entry of where you came in, right through to where you are today.
Yeah, so I think my journey started off really young. Fashion's really in my family. So my nana was actually working in finishing uniforms as her career. And then my mum also studied and worked in fashion. So I feel like I always had a natural affinity with it. And that really prompted me to kind of go for a role in the future that was very much a hybrid of creative work, but also some business and analytics. So I did business at university, which was obviously quite broad. But I really wanted to focus on fashion and see if I could couple business with fashion. So I interned at Brown's Fashion. This was in e-commerce, and that kind of helped me build up a case to go for my year in industry at Debenhams. And Debenhams was an amazing company to work for. I worked in sourcing and menswear. At the time, I was really disappointed to not be a buying assistant. I was really gutted to not be involved in the range builds and the sign-offs and felt like I was missing out. But looking back, it was a real kind of upskilling and unique experience in sourcing. I learned a lot of skills in production and sourcing strategies, which really underpins the very beginning of buying. And that gave me an even more unique skill set compared to kind of the average buying assistant, let's say. I was able to go even deeper. And it's knowledge that I still lean back on now, kind of 7 or 8 years later as a senior buyer. So it put me in really good stead. After this, I had a short kind of stint as a merchandising assistant, which really solidified I wanted to be a buyer. I think it was great to see both sides of the coin, but typically, like Claire, we always say you're one or the other.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that kind of prompted me to come to Zalando. And that's where I've been since. And it's really been like my training, in other words, of being a buyer. I kicked off in kidswear as an assistant buyer. So I was in private label. And here I really learned how to build a range, kind of really establish a really distinctive brand DNA. And shortly after, I moved into wholesale, still in kidswear as a junior buyer, and again found myself coupling that really creative product with much more kind of strategy building, financial literacy. And I was able to do that for Name It, which is kind of one of Europe's biggest kidswear brands. And I was able to grow that from kind of a number 5 brand to a really big player alongside Next. So yeah, that kind of ended my journey in kidswear. And then I kind of discovered that I wanted to do more in negotiation and really get back those business skills that I really dived into at university. So I moved into young fashion, which was a nice kind of segue out of kidswear. I was working with H&M, Urban Outfitters, Jaded London. And here I really doubled down on building a strategy. Where was the brand coming from, going to, how did it need to get there? And how did we use that strategy to inform our budget planning for the next season? And that leads me to where I am now. So now I'm a senior buyer in footwear. And this role is much more about kind of leadership and mentoring assistant and junior buyers with their brand portfolio. I'm doing a lot more work for more hyped brands. So working with UGG and Birkenstock. And this is moving from more buying that's focused on growth and huge sales, more focused on protecting those sales and protecting the exclusivity. So a bit of a different equation. But yeah, that's kind of been my journey. Lots of different categories and genders and age groups that has been really interesting.
I love that. And I think that's often what a lot of us fear is change and move, and the fact that you've navigated your way from children's right through to apparel, and now you're in footwear. Like, that journey of so many different product types really helps you understand the customer literally head to toe. So I think having that experience will, serve you tenfold into whether you want to go back to where you came from, pivot in any which way. So I think that's amazing. What I also love is your journey. I think everybody has a story, and we often don't think about how we have been influenced or inspired by where we've been to where we are today. And what I mean by that is, you know, you mentioned your grandma and your mum. So those people that you hold dearly, how much influence they had on where you are today. And whether you study fashion, whether you study economics, or you study business like yourself, you know, a lot of them core values still carry you through to the fashion industry. And I think this is often a misconception of, you must do fashion, you must have a degree in this, you must do that. Absolutely not. There is no real book. And I'm glad we got rid of a lot of that, of this old stereotype of what you must have to come into a certain industry. And I think as we go through, you know, the rest of this chat today, we'll understand how business and analytics, as you've touched on really kind of just faintly at the moment, really serves you so well to have that analytical mind as a buyer. So, and a nice weave into the next area that I wanted to ask you about was, what is a day in the life of a buyer? As Laura, what does that look like?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I'd say the heart of the role is all about building a customer-centric assortment. And we hear this line all the time in retail: right product at right time. Yeah, that is the absolute strapline of retail. So I would say a typical day in the life always kicks off with trade, whether that's weekly or daily. It's always about reviewing what is happening now. Do we have a huge growth area that's exceeding our expectations? Do we need to mitigate more risk? You know, were we too optimistic in the beginning? And where is the customer changing their buying patterns? So that's always the most informative part of the day, I would say, and really sets the scene. The second half of the morning is then using all of that intel, let's say, to then review our open to buy. So it's always questioning, was our financial planning correct? And is it still relevant? We're usually planning, you know, months in advance. So we need to constantly compare the two. So this is then looking at, do we have too much budget in one category that's actually now not working? Do we need to move that budget into reorder so that we can capitalize on never out of stock products? And the goal is really always about staying as flexible as possible. And that's probably been the biggest lesson learned in retail ever since the pandemic. So that's,
and a lesson that none of us will forget if we've whether you're in the industry or not, something we'll never forget. Absolutely.
Yes. And then we're using that information to then inform the afternoon, which is usually about reaching out to suppliers and then building and delivering on the data that we've seen into our actions. So if I've got a really high performing product area or trend, do I have a short lead time supplier that can then give me more stock to be more customer centric here and have more availability? Do I need to back more fabrics for my long lead time suppliers because I expect this sales pattern to continue for even longer? And how can I keep my range as flexible and as relevant to what we're seeing right now? And then I think the latter half of the day is probably then the most creative and the most lighthearted. It's then stepping back from all of the information, all of the detail, all of the conversations, and looking at the market. What are our competitors doing? What are our brands or our suppliers offering to other customers? How can we fulfill trends that we've just seen on TikTok that we think is a big bet for us? Summarizing all of this, and this is usually a real collaboration with the assistants and the junior buyers, something that all of the team can get behind, and really use to inform our merchandising team as well, who often don't have as much of a chance to have so much creative insight in their day-to-day. So it's a very holistic role, even on a day-to-day basis. Lots of talking to internal and external stakeholders, and often very fast-paced.
Yeah.
A
lot. I forgot, actually, when you're out of the realm for a while, how much there is to do. And what is exciting, although it's challenging, it is exciting of how much can change in a day. No 2 days are the same. And like you said, yes, the pandemic was one that kind of took us all by surprise. We lived through it, and there was so much changing from what we could take as opportunistic, but also what we had to mitigate in a really fast way. So I think, there's so many lessons to learn, and this is what keeps buying exciting is the change. And like you've just said, a lot of it is analytical. It's based on what's happening and being reactive. But a lot of it is taking a chance, believing in what you think you want to know. Like you say, you know, something's trending. Is that going to be right for my customer? I believe so. Do I know? No, none of us have a glass ball. We wish we did. But I think that's something that's really nice is obviously the majority of what you do is based on historical data, but there is that bit of, I'm going to try this. This is something that I'm going to put a bet against. And I think when that pays off, it's amazing. And if it doesn't pay off, you learn from it. And I think that's always the nice thing of, you know, this industry and how we do that. So with that being said, help me through with all that knowledge and your day-to-day and those things that we just touched on. How does it look like when you go into a selection meeting for a certain brand? Talk me through what that looks like with your brand.
Yes. So I'd say this is probably the element of buying or the buying role that is probably most known and most desired. And it's definitely the most exciting for us because we see all of our work in terms of the planning stage really come to life. I'd say a typical selection meeting always starts by challenging whether it's a private label supplier or a brand on what their strategy is for the season. Are they going to be focusing on lead times? Are they going to be focusing on protecting price points? Is there a specific trend that they are, as you say, Claire, really going to have as a big bet? And that really sets the scene, and it really focuses on closing the gap between what's happening in our world with our brand or our retailer and what's happening elsewhere, and how do we close that gap and make sure that it's, I can't say the word enough, most relevant for the customer, because I think the industry is being so challenged on this at the moment. So yes, we will have the strategy, and then we will dive into kind of where we're coming from, where we're going to, and how we're going to get there. So the coming from on our side as buyers would be reviewing past season performance. What parts of the assortment do we need to protect? And is the supplier able to offer that to us? And is it going to be at the same price points, same deliveries, and so on? And then where we're going to is then the new product and the really exciting part. So how are we going to build on these trends? And again, how do we close the gap between the customer and what we think is going to happen? So something that's really interesting specifically about working at Zalando is our customer insights data. We look into substitution rates and also search rates. And that gives us an even more intelligent kind of bet or guess as to what the customer wants. So we couple that with then what the brand or the supplier is showing to us, and make sure that we're working as close as possible. And then the final part in terms of then how we deliver on it is then making sure that, again, we're buying as flexibly as possible. So do we have the parts of the assortment that we're backing high volume on that's going to be highly available to the customer and keeps them coming back? But do we also have this more pinnacle product that's really top tier assortment that brings fresh DNA and evolves the brand onwards, and keeps the customer excited? And ultimately what we see there by doing both kind of ends of the pyramid is that we enhance the basket size as much as we can do, which is obviously always the goal working with retail as a business, and giving the customer choice. So yeah, it's really kind of a push-pull scenario. And ultimately it's making sure that both ends of the partnership, so buyer and supplier, are winning in some way.
Absolutely. It's a relationship. And I think that's, if you get that right and have it as a partnership and be on the same page and be fair with one another, then that's how brands, you know, develop, how they work well, how they perform. And I think you learn that further and further through your career, that if you work together, it works. You know, ultimately that's the kind of the nugget that you take away, but it does take time. I think there is sometimes a little bit of friction with brands. Do it this way, but we're the brand, we know, but ultimately you're dealing with the customer. So it's meeting somewhere in the middle, and then you know, making sure that that partnership does work. So I do love that. I think that's something that if you have a really good brand and they work with you in that respect, then, you know, 9 times out of 10 it's a winning recipe, which is great for all involved.
Yeah.
So What I'd love to know, and I think you've touched on this actually at the start, which was really nice. For somebody coming into buying, whether you're changing up your career or you're starting out in your career, what would you say is the skill set and kind of key things that really, really will set you up for a successful career in buying? What does that look like for you, since you are a buyer? You know, you've been successful through your career. You're a senior buyer right now in your position. So talking to, like I say, somebody either wants a career change or starting out, what would you advise them as a good skill set to have?
Yeah, so obviously the fundamental part of being a buyer is obviously focused on product or fashion, and that's the heart of it. But also a huge part of the job is people. And as a buyer, you are really the central hub for bringing together hundreds of stakeholders and so many different types. So logistics, marketing, merchandising, the warehouses, you name it, where we are the hub. And by being the hub, we are also kind of the representative for either a strategy, the retailer that you're working for, or just a single buy that you're doing. So that is something that is really important. What I would say though is that, I mean, as an example, I started off my career being a bit more introverted than I am now. And I honestly did struggle a bit with the huge amount of exposure and the different types of communication that you constantly have to exert. But I would actually say now, having done it for so many years, I'm so much more extroverted than I was. And it feels so much more natural to me to be able to involve myself in so many people-focused topics. So I'd say if you're starting off your career and you think, you know, this role is so varied and it's dealing with so many different stakeholders, I'm not sure if that's for me. There are ways for you to engage in it and really perform well in it without compromising your natural kind of way in how you deal with people. So I'd say that's a really important skill, and just the ability to communicate in a really simplified way. Sometimes you have to explain a strategy over and over and over again to, again, so many different types of stakeholders that have their own strategies or don't actually have an understanding of what it is that you do day to day. So to prepare for all of those unpredictable conversations and situations you have with stakeholders, just to simplify how you communicate, is a really important skill.
I love that. I wasn't expecting you to say that actually, but I absolutely love it. Yeah. I was expecting you to go down more the business route, and I love that you've touched on that, because I've worked with you. I've had the pleasure of working with you, hence why we're in touch and we're doing this today. Because I have a lot of respect for you as a person and how you come across. So the fact that you say how important it is to have, you know, that communication style, and also what I love about what you've just said as well is not to change fundamentally who you are. You grow, we all grow, and we all evolve. But when something doesn't sit right, that's also okay. And I think that's a really big lesson to learn, that sometimes when you enter this business, you think, I'm never going to be that person that's on stage and they're commanding the room and they're all this. You don't have to be. And I think that's just the thing. You don't have to be. You can still get across your point. You can still, you know, deliver a strategy, and you can still be successful in your career, but you don't have to be person B. You can be who you are without fitting into a mold. And I think I love that, the way you've put that across of, you know, I think all of us suffer from imposter syndrome at some time. And I myself are somewhere, I titter between an introvert and an extrovert. I think I'm obviously more on the introverted side, but I push myself to be that way, but push myself to where my own comfort zone is. And I think as long as you remind yourself of that, and I think ultimately stay true to the core of who you are, then I think that's such a good tip. So I love the fact that you've gone down the route of it's about people, because I think if you remind yourself of that, you're only as strong as your team. Goes without saying. You can't do this by yourself. You said that in your career path as well, that, you know, the amount of stakeholders that you need to deal with, a buyer is at the hub, at the heart of everything. You know, you learn to respect and be respected by those stakeholders as well. So yeah, I love that. I think that's a super, super good tip. and definitely something you learn and perfect along the way. Really, really
Yeah.
cool sound advice. Absolutely.
You're never alone as a buyer. There's always
Oh, absolutely. Whether you like it or not.
Yes, exactly.
Sometimes shutting down your computer at night and being alone is a godsend. It's like just 5 minutes, just nobody. So
Peace.
there's pros and cons. Exactly. But a bit of a step change. So
Yes.
we've heard about where you started, your journey so far, what a day in the life of Laura looks like, buy-in, what the skill set is. So now to the product.
Yes.
You also touched on kind of, okay, where it is a huge amount of importance to be aware of product, be aware of trends. So something exciting. What are the kind of must-haves for this season, and who is the brand or brands that we should be looking out for?
Yes. So I would say biggest trend for next season, it's again going to be distressed denim. I think we've seen this building for 2 to 3 years now, and it's really played the long game. But when we look at brands such as, Urban Outfitters, Weekday, Jaded London, their iconic Colossus denim, this is huge on social media. But what we're going to see now is that it moves from being a really early adopter trend that's more in the niche to something that is really mass accepted. And we're going to see it from young fashion brands, modern brands, mainstream brands. So that's really exciting. What's also going to be elevated more is tinting and distressing. So, sorry, someone's just coming now. I'm so sorry.
Don't worry. Absolutely, don't worry. It's still recording, so I'll just edit it out. This is the luxury. Could you imagine if we were live?
Live on Instagram.
Exactly.
Sorry, someone came
one
in
day. Look, my internet didn't work before I started, so don't worry. This is the normality of life. So all good.
Oh gosh. Should we go from the top?
Yeah, let's go from the top. So it was asking around what's the biggest trend of the season and which brands are kind of the brands we need to be looking out for.
Yeah, really exciting topic. So I would say we've obviously seen distressed denim. It's been building for the last 2 to 3 years. Weekday really kicked this off, Urban Outfitters, but also Jaded London. So they're really iconic Colossus denim that's huge on Instagram. What's going to be different for the new season is that it will move from kind of an early adopter trend to a more mass accepted trend. So we'll see it from young fashion to kind of modern mainstream. Yes, and obviously tints are a big part of this, tints and distressed denim. So kind of this really worn green effect or kind of red undertone denim. So that's something that is very much here to stay. And yeah, will be growing even more. But I think beyond that, obviously, we've had the huge 90s revival. I'm seeing a lot of capris on TikTok, which I don't know if we're ready for it. But I also did see someone in Berlin wearing them last weekend. So I think it's very early and it is that niche adoptive trend, but something to really be conscious of. And I think that kind of plays into the most exciting brands, which for me is absolutely Jaded London. They have got the benefit of being very short lead time, so they really react. They are very much in the hubs of where their customer is. So, they're all over TikTok, they're all over Instagram, and they do lots of events in their main hubs. So Berlin and LA, for example.
Cool.
And yeah, I think what's really special about them is that they just stay so true to this unique brand DNA. And they really backed this 90s revival, years ago. And where we're discussing kind of taking those big bets, that is the bet that they took, and it's paid off because they are the go-to now for that type of aesthetic. So yeah, I'm still very excited about Jaded.
Yeah, I remember them from the young fashion days, and
Yes.
they were somebody that, like you say, just they knew what they wanted to do and stuck to their story, and it paid off. And I think having that true, strong DNA from a brand really excites something in a customer as well as from a buyer who's, somewhere in between the brand, the buyer, and then the consumer. And I think the customer sees that as, such a strong hold that the brand, is, yeah, the truth. So it makes you kind of believe in the brand. And I think that's where, as a customer, then you're loyal almost. And that's a word that we don't hear nowadays a lot, because especially within younger fashion, it can be quite an aggressive area with price points. But I think if you are true to what you do and you have this strong DNA like Jaded do, then I think it really does play a very nice story of success, which, as you're saying, it's great for not only the consumer, but when you're passionate about the brand as a buyer as well. That's super cool. So denim, 90s, and Jaded, those are the key things.
Yes.
Cool. So just on that, and saying about, like, brands being able to carry themselves through from season to season and year over year, that's something we're seeing less of due to everything that's going on in the industry right now. It's tough out there. We're seeing all the time unfortunate news of brands going under, people losing their jobs, which is incredibly sad. So on that, and being self-aware and being aware of what's going on in the industry, what would you say are the biggest challenges for buyers that are facing, at the moment in this current retail environment?
Yeah, I honestly think it's, as you've just quoted, Claire, it's really these market conditions that we're in. Obviously, we're seeing it everywhere in all corners of life, it feels like, at the moment. For retail specifically, we're really experiencing a huge pressure on the entire supply chain. So factories, logistics, brands, retailers, there is a huge amount of pressure on every single part of the chain to protect margins and just to maintain where we are. I think with that, the initial challenge was to readdress our expectations. We came, especially at Zalando, from a huge growth period. So to suddenly find ourselves faced with, customers, the purse strings are tight, and having insecurity and not wanting to necessarily go for these in and out trends, but to opt for the more logo namesakes that they can really trust will still be relevant in 5 years' time. That resulted in us having to just really readdress what our plans are going forward and how flexible we are. So the lesson learned out of these conditions has, again, been all about flexibility and really protecting our partnerships, again, to make sure that no matter what decisions are made, everybody is not necessarily even winning, but just protecting their position. What I think has actually been really positive that's been born out of these conditions is definitely nearshoring. So we're seeing lots in the press at the moment about so many household names and retailers moving their production towards Europe so that they're able to not only react quicker, but also, create employment. And that's so important because, we are in this kind of huge cultural moment, and it really makes you realize kind of how the ecosystem has such a big impact. So I think that is a positive that's been born out of it, and it's something that I hope we will penetrate into even more in the future, because it's so volatile, and we just need to be able to prepare for all kind of scenarios.
Yeah, and I think you're completely right. I love that this nearshore observation has been picked up on, and the fact that we neglected that in the industry for so long is a shame. And it's kind of come back full circle now, and it's like, hey, look at what's right on your doorstep. And I think it's important, and I hope that it does last. It brings so much back to the economy, and like you say, jobs are opening up again, and it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So let's hope that does have longevity and we don't go back to old ways. There's a whole other topic that we could go down, that big word beginning with S, sustainability. And that's for another day, but absolutely, I love the fact that, you know, the industry is kind of looking at what is on the doorstep and tapping into that again, and, you know, yeah, making sure we're more self-aware.
Yeah.
So super valid. Last question, and I think one that makes you reflect a lot is, what I'd love to know is, if you could look back at your younger self when you were first starting out here or earlier in your career, what would you tell yourself? What would be that one kind of piece of advice, if you could whisper in your own ear? Yeah, the younger you, what would it be?
Yeah, I think for me, what springs to mind is be consistent. I think the most successful people are really reliable in, you know, it doesn't have to be everything they do, but something they do.
Yeah.
So I really feel that if you can hit 90% of how you do something, whether that's how you write an email, how you communicate to leadership, how you produce a project, if you can hit that 90% of the time really consistent, you can afford for the 10% to fail or be lost. And I think to bring yourself that buffer is so valuable, and it relaxes you as well. It makes you breed more self-confidence. And again, it's not about doing 90% of everything you do really consistently and really well. It's about doing 90% of one thing really well. And that's how you stay in people's minds, and you create connections, and that will only serve to benefit you as your career goes on.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's so true. And consistency is everything. I think once you have that in place, it's something that you'll enjoy, something that you'll become more confident in. But I love the fact that you do give yourself breathing space. And I think a lot of people don't. We put so much pressure on ourselves. Society does it naturally. People who are around do it. We do it subconsciously. But if we remember that it's okay, sometimes I think that's the piece of advice that, you know, will get us through your career, your life, you know, everything gets us through day to day is, you know what, that didn't work out the way I thought it would have, but it's all right. You know, just giving ourselves that little bit of leeway of, you know, life isn't perfect, but that's all right, you know. So I absolutely love that. I think it's, if we can all take a piece of that advice with us, I'll do it today. If I mess up in some way, that's my 10% allowance.
Yeah, exactly. That's your buffer.
Oh, good. Exactly. Exactly. But I want to just thank you for today. I am so happy that we were able to have this chat, learning more about you and where your journey started and where you are today. And I'm super happy for where you are. And I know that you'll go on to do many great things. You're only kind of starting in your career. And I mean by that I know that you'll go so much further. Like, you've achieved so much right now, and have the pleasure to have worked with you. I know that, yeah, the sky's the limit for you. And I hope that whoever's listening to this gains a lot of experience. And of course, we'll stay in touch. And if anybody wants to reach out and know a little bit more, then, you know, we're open to that as well. But thank you for today. And
thank you also so much, Matt. Thank you. I can only reiterate it back to you. Like, your mentorship was so valuable to me, and you've taught me so many hard and soft skills in such a range of pockets of this job. And yeah, skills I lean back on every day. So thank you so much. And I've loved this conversation. I've loved like our shared experiences. So
pleasure. Absolutely. So good. And yeah, first episode done. So thank you, Laura. Thank you
so much. See you soon. Bye.